You're watching Newsday. Time for our panel today. Pat Conroy and Tim Wilson here in the studio with me as the two sides seemingly want the same outcome, I think, but are arguing a lot over about it. Is this the Seinfeld political debate going on today?
This is a political debate that Bill Shorten has brought upon us for no purpose. We want to remove the discriminations that Labor introduced that allow for discrimination against LGBTI kids in school, period. We want to make sure that schools can still conduct themselves consistent with their ethos and faith, period. We have said we're happy to have a conscience vote on this right now, which means that we will remove the provisions around LGBTI kids and we will have a discussion around the religious freedom components. And the Prime Minister openly accepts that the proposals being put forward may not even get up. Why is Labor blocking a conscience vote on this issue? The truth is, the Leader of the Opposition, the Emperor of the Opposition, has no clothes. He knows a lot of his own members don't support his position, so he won't allow them a conscience vote.
Pat Conroy?
That's complete rubbish on 2 points. First, on the actual amended bill that the government's supporting, it doesn't end discrimination. It replaces it with another form of discrimination.
That is absolute fiction.
No, I've seen legal advice that says that as long as the discrimination is consistent with the faith of the school, they can still discriminate against kids based on their gender and sexual identity. It's very clear as long as it's part of their teaching. So you could exclude a student from receiving teaching because they're gay.
False.
So how can our legal advice is rock solid on that.
If there would be no ambiguity in my position against that. Well, it is just false. And if that's true, allow a conscience vote on it.
Can I just
allow one right now?
Can I just pick up on what you're saying? So you're saying the discrimination is if there is a gay student, they would not get that religious education? No, this is not religious education. The effect of Amendment Clause 7F, which is what the government is supporting, is that they are protected from the Sex Discrimination Act if they provide teaching consistent with their faith. So if their faith says that it's evil to be gay, they can provide different or non-existent teaching to a student based on that. So that's what I'm asking. So in that situation, would it be better for a school not to put that student in that class that says to be gay is...
No, this isn't about religious education. This is all teaching. So if they said...
They're not going to take them out of a maths class.
Well, the effect of their amendment is that they have protection to do that.
But
and that's just wrong.
Why would they do that? Why would they take a kid out of a maths class?
But why would you even allow it through legislation? Our bill, if we can go back to basic principles, our bill simply ends discrimination against kids based on their sexual identity.
Let's discuss what discrimination is or isn't. So if you've got a Christian school that wants to teach children that, according to the Bible, homosexuality is wrong...
Completely protected. That's fine.
So is that discriminating against the student? Can they make the student go to that class?
They can. They can make them school. They can do all the teaching they want consistent with their faith. They just can't discriminate physically on that student by excluding them from a class.
Here is the practical reality. The dishonesty that's just come from Pat. Firstly, the idea that Labor doesn't oppose this provision. They actually agreed to it in the Senate. I know you're outside of this process because you're in the House of Representatives, but they actually agreed to it in the Senate and the spirit of it in the Senate. No, it's not rubbish. It's actually true. You can go back and check the record. You should speak to your Shadow Attorney General. It also doesn't allow the provisions in which he's outlining.
It does.
This is a fiction. But even if that were true, let's have a conscience vote on it right now, and it will be defeated. If the arguments you're putting forward... The reason Labor don't want to have a conscience vote on this issue is because they want to keep it alive. They want to go into an election year next year and put children's lives, security and anxiety on the ballot paper. Some of us want to deal with this now. We want to remove discrimination against LGBTI students now, and we want to do it through the Parliament today. And you are the barrier and the block of doing so.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sorry.
Solid legal advice
conscience vote
you are replacing one form of discrimination with another.
It's a fictitious argument. So put it to a conscience vote now.
Why should conscience be involved in
Why should we not? We should remove this provision right now. We have put on the table that we will allow a conscience vote. We will allow this issue to be debated in the House of Representatives. It will be repealed. So it's about time you brought it to the issue.
Tim Wilson, can I ask you specifically about that same example? If you've got a Christian school that has a class where you're teaching the Scripture, Bible, and it says that marriage between a man and a woman and homosexuality is wrong in that particular class, would they be able to make that student attend the class?
Well, no, kids are supposed to attend classes all the time. I mean, this is just a ridiculous proposition. I mean, the proposition he's put up, that Pat Conroy has just put up, is one that I think is stretching the imagination of most people against.
Okay, but just what I'm talking about is a religious education class.
All the provision says is that schools are allowed to act consistent with their ethos and consistent with their values. That is an entirely reasonable justification.
But it also talks about discrimination in students. Is that example fair enough? Is that discriminating against the student to teach
No. So this is just false. Nothing in this Act renders it I'm reading it here, right now.
Sure.
Nothing in this Act renders it unlawful to engage in teaching activity that goes through, and it goes through the different provisions around doctrines and tenets of faith. It doesn't mean excluding children from school. That's false. That's just a lie. It doesn't deal with the idea. I'm sorry. It is. You are just false. You are saying what you're telling me is a fundamental untruth
about how this works, rather than the sort of philosophical. So what about a Muslim school?
It's not philosophical. It's a legal provision. I'm reading off the actual document.
What I'm saying is I want to get to a practical example. So what about a Muslim school where they might want to teach girls and boys they have different rights or obligations? Is that fair enough as well?
Well, I've always advocated against those things, but there are provisions within the Quran, and I don't know the full extent of the Quran. But if there is a general statement around morality, I'm not going to have the government come in and tell schools what their morality is when parents sign up for those schools on a voluntary basis. Children are going to enrol those schools to learn the values and cultural traditions, and by the way, that's consistent with human rights principles.
So I'm just asking, you agree that would extend in that situation?
Well, there are schools at the moment, and there are religious institutions at the moment that, when it comes to, for instance, prayer, separates genders. I don't agree with it. It's not my faith. But when it comes down to what they're able to do within the bounds of the law, they have to have the legal right to be able to operate. For instance, with relation to chapel. And how activities engage with chapel. I went to chapel when I was at school. Pat may have as well, I don't know.
Where do you sit on the Muslim school example, Pat Conroy? That's again fair enough. You're extending that right to their religious beliefs, because it's not just sexuality, it's sexuality and gender we're talking about.
Well, they have the right to provide teachings according to their doctrine. But what our bill does is it protects the rights of religious schools to teach according to their doctrine. It protects the rights of schools to compel students to go to chapel. What it does outlaw is actual discrimination against students based on their sexual orientation or identity. The amendments supported by the government don't do that. They replace it with another form of discrimination, and that's why we're opposed to it. And that brings hollow all of Morrison's words that he's going to get rid of it.
Let's have a conscience vote right now, and if you're right, and with actual scrutiny and evidence, you'll be proven right and it will be defeated. No, we're happy to have a conscience vote right now. We're happy to have it today. So we were happy to have a conscience vote on it today.
When you say, I think we've exhausted where we're going to get on that particular element of it.
But don't you think you can't say it's a delay when we're saying we are prepared to have a conscience vote on it today? That's not delaying. That's saying let's bring it on.
Please.
Well, you're the one saying you don't want it.
You've said since the Wentworth by-election you're going to fix this up.
Yeah, and we want to fix it
second last day of sitting
and we want
now
to fix
try and
it
resolve it.
You guys have...
You're also fixing it before the Ruddock Review's been released. I mean,
well, exactly. That's how serious and important it is. And that's what we want to fix right here, right now. I want
to go to one other example when it comes to a school being able to apply their religious tenet, perhaps butting up against discrimination for... based on someone's sexuality. If you've got students, say in year 10 or whatever, and there's a girl and boy going out and they're holding hands around the school grounds and they're allowed to, but you've got two boys holding hands in year 10, could a school expel them, for example, for not...
Absolutely not.
No.
Sorry, that's not true. If Pat gets his way and this issue keeps going on and doesn't confront and deal with it in the next 2 days, then yes, it will be lawful.
But
that is complete. And let's remember,
I just want to get your view on this without going back into this legislation element again, because there's just a stalemate over that. So
it's actually quite important.
Sure, but we've just got conflicting legal advice right now. I want to get to this example again. So you're saying in that case the school, even though it would be their religious ethos, could not discriminate against that student?
I don't believe that's good, and I don't believe that's the case. And the whole point of what we are trying to do today is remove the discrimination against LGBTI students and to take it out of the law and to allow religious schools to be able to simply teach, and it's just teach, their long-held views on morality and consistent with their faith and tenets.
But doesn't this go to the behaviour as well? The student's behaviour is technically against the tenet there?
No. It's about teachings. That's the falsehood of everything that Pat's saying.
Under our bill, those two gay students will be protected. According to the legal advice that is out there, under the Liberal bill, they will be prohibited.
So out of all of this, you agree on every outcome I've put to you. It's just how we're getting there.
And then that's why I say, let's have a conscience vote. Let's deal with the issue today. The opposition are the ones saying they don't want a conscience vote. The reason is simple. The Emperor of the Opposition has no clothes. He knows that in the Senate and in the House of Representatives there are Labor members who would rather support the provisions put forward by...
Isn't there a problem with the conscience vote? We don't have a settled
bill and how to do it. This is not a question of disagreeing over conscience. It's a legal wrangle. So the conscience vote doesn't sort anything, does it?
No, because the common provision is removing Section 38(3) of the law.
But there's not agreement on that. That's the problem.
What do you mean, getting rid of the bit about discrimination against gay kids?
How to do it and what...
You've inserted...
Everyone agrees that 38(3) should go.
But you've inserted a new provision.
There's Section 38(3) should go. And we are prepared to remove that provision today on a conscience vote.
And do nothing else.
And then, no, well, we're going to leave that to a conscience vote. And then if there are other provisions that Labor wants to introduce, they're entitled to do so. If anyone else in the government, the Prime Minister has made it clear he wants to introduce some other provisions, including those that are outlined on this piece of paper here, he's entitled to do so. It will live or die based on a conscience vote in the Parliament.
So,
and the only
you're
thing
saying
stopping
that
it
conscience
is
vote,
Labor.
You're saying that conscience vote could purely just decide removing it and then that might be all that happens?
Of course it could.
That is absolute rubbish.
Well, sorry, that's how the Parliament works.
No, what will happen is the Prime Minister will then insert in 7F that allows discrimination.
And then people can move a motion
This is
to
a
remove it.
naked ploy to keep this issue bubbling along.
No.
Again, the hypocrisy
We are happy to have
of
this
Scott
vote
Morrison
now.
and to do dodgy tricks to insert that amendment that still continues discrimination.
You agreed with it in the Senate.
It's rubbish.
No, it's not rubbish. You agree with it in the Senate. This is the sort of thing that turns people off politics. Section 38(3) could remove the discrimination against
The other thing that
LGBTI
happened in the
students
Senate, we're never out of
today,
time,
if we
the other
did.
thing that happened in the Senate this morning, Matthias Cormann seemed to say the two parties were going away and having more time, and then a few minutes later Scott Morrison was saying conscience vote.
Yeah, well, because what we've had is bad faith from the opposition at every point. We were negotiating with them in good faith. They then started debating it through the press.
All right.
At every point we've tried
So
to do the
Matthias
right thing.
Cormann says, we're going to go negotiate. 2 minutes later, the Prime Minister says, no, we're doing this. That's good faith negotiation.
No, good faith negotiation was when you guys walked out of the room, said you weren't interested in discussing it anymore, and then you went and discussed it in the public sphere.
Your party's a disgrace.
38... Well, I'm sorry. Some of us have actually worked in this space. Some of us want to see the end of discrimination against LGBTI students. Some of us want to see it before the start of the new year. If you allow a conscience vote today, we can make sure that it can happen today, Pat. And your position is a disgrace. You are trying to put the lives of children on the ballot.
Together a little bit better than this particular discussion on it. I think it just seems very strange. I think sure voters are saying, why do you agree and yet not get the answer? But anyway, legal wrangling, Tim Wilson, Pat Conroy, thanks for your time today. Have a good break if I don't see you before then.
Thanks, Dale.